It's great to be with you this morning, even though it is a little bit colder in Chicago than it is in San Diego, where I'm from, where I live with my wife and two kids, and it's awesome over there. Come on over anytime. Anytime these winters get too much for you, we'd love to have you, because this is family, and we are all one. And I just really appreciate, John, just the opportunity to share with your community and you guys, and talk about my favorite topic, grace and second chances. They did an interesting study a few years ago about people and their feelings of attractiveness. And so they handed out a bunch of surveys to men and women, asked them to rate their personal attractiveness, like how good looking are you? And so they, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 meaning you're kind of, I guess, ugly, to 10 being you're super hot, they asked men and women to rate themselves. And so they handed out the surveys, and they got the surveys back, and what they found was very interesting. They found that women tended to rate themselves less attractive than they really were. You see, they saw themselves as not as beautiful or not as pretty as maybe their friends or family members or the world at large. Say, no, you're much prettier than that. Much more beautiful. You rated yourself too low. And then men, on the other hand, so you're already laughing. You already know where I'm going with this. So men, on this survey, in this research, rated themselves more attractive than they really were. This is no surprise to us men, right? We woke up this morning, we looked in the mirror, and we just said, this is a gift, right? We're feeling pretty good about ourselves as men. Yeah, we're doing our hair, and so like, oh my gosh, my wife or my girlfriend are so lucky to have me in their world. It's like this sort of pride or arrogance, we just think we're doing better than maybe we really are. We're kind of ignoring the ever-expanding waist and our graying hair and, the nose hairs in our nose. It's like, that really matters, right? But it does. And I think that's kind of what's happening with this topic of grace and second chance. I think a lot of us think we're doing maybe better than we really are. We think like, I got that one down. I'm a Christian. I love Jesus. I go to mission every Sunday. Woohoo, I got grace. It's like, well, maybe, and maybe this is the challenge this morning, is for us to say, okay, time out, stop. Let's just take another look at our own lives. How is grace getting into our daily lives? How is grace impacting how we see our own failures and mistakes and our shortcomings? How is grace working in our homes, with our kids that drive us nuts, How's grace working at the workplace? That person that just is driving you absolutely freaking nuts, and you want to kill him and you want to avoid him, and you think he's sucking up to the boss. How does grace fit into that scenario? So I lead an organization called People of the Second Chance. I co-founded it a few years ago with a buddy of mine. And our mission is very simple. It's to help people find beauty and purpose in their story of struggle by connecting them to the God of second chances. And God has redeemed us. He loves us. Jesus on the cross has given us a radical second chance, and that should impact our lives. And I think if we were honest with ourselves, the reason why the church or Christians are either frowned upon in our culture or not having the kind of effectiveness that we should have is because we're not allowing grace to sort of ooze out of our stories and to ooze out of our hearts. Instead of bridge building, we're bridge busting. Instead of welcoming the outsider, we're saying, those people are kind of weird and funky and we just don't have room for them. Grace wants to capture our hearts and say, let's unleash second chance living. So here's just a few things I've learned about grace. Number one, grace is given best by those who know they need it most. I also know that grace plus anything is anything but grace. Sometimes the temptation is like, we want people to jump through these certain hoops, or the pathway to God is very complicated and there's some restrictions that apply. It's like, no, grace is free. Jesus welcomes all of us. It's there. It's for the taking. Accept it. Take it. I also know that grace allows the need to be right to be overruled by the need to be reconciled. So I don't know about you, but I love to be right, and I feel like my voice needs to be heard and my rights need to be defended. But my mission in life right now is not to be right, but to be loving. And that's what I want to learn to do better. Not to defend myself, but to love others, to reconcile relationships. Finally, I also learned that grace, and this is what I want to talk about this morning, that grace requires incredible amounts of courage and bravery. See, it's not for the faint of heart. It's not for the fearful. It's not for the weak. If you want to embrace this radical lifestyle called second chance, embrace this radical, wild, crazy lifestyle of grace, it means you're going to have to step up and have a little courage. We're going to have to get out of our comfort zones. There's just no way to do it any other way. I wish there was. I wish I could just be a fearful Christian and just kind of be this incredible grace giver, but it ain't going to happen. We have to move out of our comfort zone. Trust God. Trust His power. Trust that He's got it all. Say, you know what, this is really uncomfortable right now, but let's go, Jesus. I'm going to lay down my rights. I'm going to lay down my fears. I'm going to forgive fast. I'm going to forgive fiercely. Let's go. But I'm not always so great at grace. I do lead the organization, but I am as much a participant in People of the Second Chance as I am the founder and leader of it. And I'm trying to get better every day. And here's just a very simple story to explain what I'm talking about. A few years ago, we live in this neighborhood that has this alleyway. And it's kind of a narrow alleyway, and it's a fire lane. And this alleyway feeds into the different garages that we park in our neighborhood. And so one morning, my wife had taken my kids to school, and my neighbor had parked her SUV kind of right in the alleyway that you're not supposed to do. It's a fire lane. It's illegal. It makes it very difficult to get around. And so she had parked it kind of right in front of, on the opposite side of our garage. And so when my wife came home from dropping my kids off at school, she pulls into the garage, and she's having to kind of move around this SUV that's parked in the fire lane, and she pulls in the garage, and she hits my little girl's bike and runs over her helmet and smashes it. And my wife comes up and tells me what happened, and shows me the helmet that's all now kind of just smashed up and useless. And being a man, I just went right into action of fixing this problem. And so I got a piece of paper and a black Sharpie, and I was going to solve this problem. And I began to write a wonderful letter, a little note. Great amounts of passion. I said, "Dear lady," because I didn't know her name. I just knew that she was a woman. No, I really did. She was a woman. I'm not saying that because women park their car SUVs in the fire lane. I don't know her name, but I said, "Dear lady, you've caused my wife to hit my little girl's bike and smash her helmet because you parked your big freaking SUV in the fire lane." And said, "Do not ever, 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 ever park here again." And I underlined all the evers and made it really nice, and I signed it, "Love, Mike." Then I took the letter and the helmet. I went into the alleyway, and I put the letter and the helmet on top of the SUV's windshield. And problem solved, right? All good. Good job, Mike. Driving to work. About an hour later, I get a phone call from my wife. She said, "Hey, you're not going to believe this." Like, what? So, you know that letter that you wrote? About telling about the never to park there again and about what she did? I'm like, "Oh, yeah, I know that letter." So, my wife says, "Well, that letter is now torn up into a million little pieces and is in the helmet sitting next to our garage." And I'm like, "Oh, no, she didn't." Oh, no, 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 no. Well, I became enraged. I'm like, she is clearly at wrong. The signs are posted. This is a fire lane. She's the one who caused this accident to happen with my little girl's bicycle. And then she just throws it right back into my face. And I swear, this is the God's honest truth. So the first thing that goes through my mind of how I'm going to get her back? Mike Foster, People of Second Chance, Grace Guy, talking at Mission Church this morning. What is the first thing? What is my solution? I will slash her tires. I wish I was better than this, but I'm not. I will slash her tires. And then came to my sense of like, that could get me in trouble. And I don't want to go to jail. Deathly fear of going to jail. So I'm not going to do that. So second option, again, I'm telling the truth. This is not my finest moment whatsoever. We have a dog poop problem in our neighborhood. People don't pick up their dog poop. And so the second thing that went through my head was, I am going to pick up all the dog poop in our neighborhood, and I'm going to put it on top of her SUV. I didn't do any of that, by the way. I shared the story in the first service, and they go, well, what happened? They have some wonderful grace experience and reconciliation. It's like, no, it didn't work out that way. In fact, what I did was what any good Christian pastor would do. I called the tow truck company and had her car towed. I thought, well, that's the best example. And again, not my finest moment, but this is the reality of our lives. We all can improve in these areas. We can all say, let's get a good gut check this morning, Mission. How am I doing in the areas of grace? Are you like Mike in the dog poop story? Or are you like Jesus, who's reaching out and forgiving and loving? You're letting grace define your life. Let's look at Ruth, chapter 3. And I love this story of Ruth because what this story is about is this idea of courage and being brave. And again, in order for us to live out second chance lives, make a difference in our alleyways, when our neighbors park their SUVs, when the people cut us off on the road, people that work drive us nuts, when our children have maybe run away and are far from God, man, we just need grace. We need to have that overflowing in our lives, the sense of second chance living. And one thing I know is this, and you may want to write this down if you have your own Sharpie and paper. You may want to write this down on the paper, on your forehead, whatever you want. Remember this. If this is the only thing that you remember today, it's this. Life shrinks or expands in proportion to one's courage. Life shrinks or expands in proportions to one's courage. And Jesus wants us to live courageous lives. That's a truth. That's a fact. As we look at the story of Ruth and how she lived, in spite of her circumstances, in spite of who she was, she lived with courage. She trusted God with it all. See, I think sometimes the church is so concerned about how this is all going to work out. It's like, oh my gosh, are those people? Right? I don't know, that relationship. And this thing's over. There's sort of this fatalist idea that we have that God can't redeem and restore and resurrect the things that are broken. That he can't take the broken and make it incredibly beautiful. That's what he does. That's what he's done in our lives. We got to trust that fact. Have courage, bravery. How many of you seen the movie We Bought a Zoo? Matt Damon. It's a really good movie. I encourage you to get it. One of my favorites. But there's this great scene with Matt Damon's character and his son. They're sitting on the floor of kind of the stable, and they had bought in a zoo. That's a big surprise. And so they bought this zoo, and things weren't going so well, and it's kind of tough. And he's sitting there, and he just makes this statement. I just love this statement, and it really defines the story of Ruth, and I hope it defines the story of our lives when it comes to grace. And he just goes, sometimes all it takes is 20 seconds of insane courage, 20 seconds of embarrassing bravery, and something great will come something great will come. Just 20 seconds. And so maybe the challenge this morning is not that we go, well, I'm just going to start living a life of courage and second chance and embrace God's story for me. Maybe I'm just 20 seconds this week, sometime. Step out and trust God that he can do something great. That's what's happening here in Ruth chapter 3. So let me give you a little background on Ruth. Ruth's a widow. She's with her mother-in-law, Naomi, who's also a widow. Ruth is kind of caring for her. They're Moabites. They're from the land of Moab. And Ruth has been a widow for 10 years, and it's tough. She doesn't have much. Widows at this time were very much marginalized in society, often forced into prostitution, had very little legal standing. It was tough to be a widow at this time. And so Ruth and Naomi are living in Moab, and they come to Bethlehem to look for work, hoping to work in the fields. And they get a job, or Ruth gets a job in the fields of a man named Boaz, who's wealthy and just a good man, a man of character. And so Ruth and Naomi put together this plan of second chance, of saying, maybe God has something planned for me. In spite of my circumstances, in spite of my situation, being sort of the outsider in society, in spite of all this stuff that's working against me, I'm going to trust, and I'm going to take 20 seconds of insane courage and step out. And so they put together a plan, and this is where we find it at verse 7 in Ruth chapter 3. And so after Boaz had finished eating and drinking and was in good spirits, he lay down at the far end of the pile of grain and went to sleep. Then Ruth came quietly, uncovered his feet, and lay down. So this was Ruth's moment. She's going, I'm going to go talk to Boaz. I'm going to have this 20 seconds of insane courage. Boaz is sleeping. He's laying on his grain to protect it and make sure that nobody steals it. And by the way, it's really important to know that Ruth's coming in late at night. Boaz is sleeping. She puts herself at his feet. This is not some sort of boom chicka wah wah moment, okay? We don't got Marvin Gaye on the radio and she's lighting candles everywhere. It's like, hey, baby. Nothing like that. This is legit. This is the only time that she can get and kind of engage and talk to him. So she's laying at his feet. Verse 8, around midnight, Boaz suddenly woke up and turned over. He was surprised to find a woman lying at his feet. Who are you, he asked. I am your servant Ruth, she replied. Spread the corner of your covering over me, for you are my family redeemer. So what is Ruth saying here? Spread the corner of your covering over me, for you are my family redeemer. She's basically, in simple terms, asking Boaz to marry her. Okay, it's kind of bold. It's kind of out there. They haven't been dating. Boaz kind of knows a little bit about Ruth, but she's kind of laying it out there. Courage, 20 seconds of insane courage. And for those of you who watch ABC programming, this is sort of like our bachelorette moment for Ruth, okay? This is the rose ceremony. And guys, you men in the audience, don't tell me you don't know what I'm talking about right now. Because I know you watch that show too, okay? And sometimes when I watch that show, I feel like I have to turn in my man card to watch it. But still, I love that show. It's addicting, but this is the rose ceremony. Boaz, will you marry me? Lots of different reactions that Boaz could have at this moment. He could reject her. He'd be offended by that. He'd like, get away from me. What are you doing in the middle of the night at my feet? How does he respond? The Lord bless you, my daughter, Boaz exclaimed. You are showing even more family loyalty now than you did before, for you have not gone after a younger man, whether rich or poor. So he's flattered. It's like, hey, this is cool. Verse 11, now don't worry about a thing, my daughter. I will do what is necessary, for everyone in town knows you are a virtuous woman. So this moment, this 20 seconds of insane courage offered by Ruth in this town, in this city, in this situation, knowing all the truth of her life, She puts it out there. Boaz responds. And this sets a course of events to where they would eventually get married, Boaz and Ruth. They would have an offspring. They would have a son named Obed. And then Obed would be the father of Jesse. And the father of Jesse would be the father of King David. So that makes Ruth, because of this moment, because of this request to marry, makes Ruth King David, who wrote the Psalms, and King David. Ruth is his great-grandmother. Not only that, what's even more impressive about just this one little moment of courage is that Ruth is one of the 4 women mentioned in the Bible in Jesus' genealogy. This little tiny step of faith. Say, I'm going to look beyond my past, all my problems, my societal standing, my history. I'm going to believe God can do something here. And he did. And I think it's impressive. I mean, do any of you have a book in the Bible about your story? I mean, Ruth does. Why? Because she lived with courage. She said, I believe in second chances for my life. It was powerful. So what can we learn here? Just a couple quick things. Number one is we need to have the courage to embrace our whole story. Your scars are simply tattoos with a better story. They say you survived something. And so often as we look at our story, we think this is our story, especially sometimes our past and our mistakes and our failures, our crises, our messy divorces, our addictions, our sin. Because God, I don't know, that's a waste. I want to forget about that. I want to censor that. And Jesus says, no. Have the courage to embrace it. Because our pain has a purpose. Our mess has a message. Grace means that all of our mistakes and loss and pain now serve a purpose. God's glory in our weakness is how God reaches our world. Yet so often we become this false self. We have these fake little lives just so we'll fit in, be accepted. We don't want people to know the real us because it's too hard, too dangerous for us to share kind of our story. The challenge to you this morning is embrace it. Embrace all of it. God has written that story for a purpose. See, we are rescued to become a rescuer. It is not wasted. And one of the great things and things that I love to do is help people understand that what they see as a liability, what they see as a loss, is the very thing, is the very moment, the very struggle that is going to build the bridge to somebody else in their time of need. Don't doubt God. Don't take the mess and put it in the closet and forget about it. Use it for the kingdom. The greatest gift that you and I can give to the world is becoming the person that you and I were uniquely meant to be. Your story matters. Don't censor it. There's a guy named Monty Roberts. And Monty, when he was growing up, was very poor. And he and his family lived in a camper shell that was attached to a truck. And him and his mom and dad and his brother and sister all lived in this very small space. They're basically homeless. They had nothing. But Monty had a dream. And when he was in high school, his teacher asked the class to write a paper, an essay, about what they want to be when they grow up. And so Monty, he knew, he'd been thinking about this for a long time. He began to write his essay about how he wants to own a 100-acre ranch someday, where he would raise thoroughbred horses and have ranch hands working with them. And just, he could see it all with such vivid clarity, in spite of the fact that he was living in this trailer with his parents, had nothing, destitute. So he wrote the essay, the teacher collected the essays a few days later, turned them in, and a couple days later, he got his paper back from the teacher. And on his paper was a big fat letter F. The teacher had given him a fail. Monty was kind of confused about this, and so he goes up after class and he asks his teacher, "How come you gave me an F?" And she looks at him and she just says, "Monty, the grammar was good, the punctuation was good, spelling, all that, but as I read your paper, I just found it to be so unbelievable. Monty, you're poor. Your family has nothing. How are you going to pay for this ranch? And how are you going to buy those horses? And how are you going to pay the salaries and the wages of those workers? I mean, this is just unreal. And so that's why I gave you an F." She goes, "But listen, if you want to raise your grade, you can rewrite the paper and do something a little more reasonable, something a little more doable about what you want to be when you grow up, and I will go ahead and raise your grade." And I love Monty's response. This was a courageous response. He looks at his teacher. He hands the paper to her, and he goes, "You keep the F, I'll keep my dream. You keep the F, I'll keep my dream." And the wonderful thing about this story, and just the cherry on top of this moment, in my opinion, is that today, Monty Roberts owns a 110-acre horse ranch in Solvang, California, where he raises thoroughbred horses. See, you're going to come across people every single day who want to steal your dream, who want to put you in a box because of your past, because of your addiction, because of your sin, because of what you've done. And Jesus says, "No, no, no. You are loved. You are qualified. Let's go. Do not shrink back." Don't let people who gave up on their dreams steal yours. Step in faith, encourage, and believe and trust that radical grace is a part of your story and that Jesus is on the move. And finally, last thing that we can learn from Ruth's story. So not only just that we embrace our story and who we are, but we have to have the courage to escape Victimville and head on over to Gracetown. Escape Victimville and head over to Gracetown. We kind of have this rule, unwritten rule at People of the Second Chances. It's kind of like our no shirts, no shoes policy. And it's simply this: you cannot live as a victim. We can't help you if you see yourself through this lens. And I realize that life is hard. And I talk and counsel people all the time, and I'm just like, it breaks my heart to hear their stories of what they've gone through and how they've been wronged, or the decisions that they made that have hurt their lives. It breaks my heart, but at the end of the day, if we are still caught in our past, if we see ourselves as a victim, if we live a life of blame versus a life of responsibility, then we are denying the power of grace. We're denying the power of God. We're saying, "God, you can't do anything with this." That is pride. That is making the power of the cross very small when we live as victims. Jesus wants to free us from that. When life gives you lemons, set up the world's biggest lemonade stand, okay? Some of these things, it may not be your fault, but it is your responsibility. It's your life. I think sometimes shame and the sense of feeling unworthy and not forgiving ourselves just creeps into our soul, and it kills grace. Unleash it. Embrace it. You are only one prayer, one decision away from a completely radical and new life. My wife and I and kids go to the zoo all the time, and we love walking around and seeing the animals. And there was this exhibit that was under construction for the Galapagos turtle cage. And we were walking up to it, and they had this big sign saying we're going to spend $1.2 million on this brand new Galapagos turtle cage. And I mean, think for $1.2 million, this is going to be some amazing turtle town, right? And these are going to be some very happy turtles. Starbucks, lattes in the morning, probably waterfalls. So we're like, oh, wow, this is going to be cool. And they were going to have this big grand opening, spending $1.2 million. They had the diagrams and the renderings of how cool this thing was going to be. But as we began to think about that and think about all these upgrades they were going to make to this turtle exhibit, I thought to myself, at the end of the day, this is still a cage. These turtles are not free. And I think sometimes we make the mistake when we're living in Victimville and we have refused to come over to Gracetown. It's like we've just been upgrading our cage. Yeah, things are a little better. Hey, I gotta, it's not as bad as it used to be, but if we don't let the power and we don't let the authority of what Jesus did on the cross to say, you are forgiven, we don't let it to penetrate the deepest, darkest, most sinful parts of our heart, then we truly are not free. We're just upgrading the cage. Jesus wants to set us free. It takes courage, though. We say, I am no longer going to live under the umbrella of shame and judgment and blame and loss. I am going to embrace my second chance. It's a story of a guy named Roy Riegels. Back in 1929, it's the Rose Bowl. And 71,000 fans. It's the biggest game of the season. It's the Golden State Golden Bears and the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets are playing. And it's a moment. And there's a guy named Roy Riegels who's the center for the Golden Bears. And it's the second quarter, and Roy hikes the ball. He's a starter. He's very good. Roy hikes the ball, and they run the play, and the ball gets loose and gets fumbled. And so Roy ends up in all the pile, all the sort of commotion of a fumbled ball. He picks up the ball, and he starts to run as fast as a center can run, right? And he starts booking it down the field. Oh, yeah, it's fine. The crowd's going crazy. The wild. It's just like, this is my moment. This is my glory. Oh, here we go. He's running. 69 yards until he's tackled. On the 1 yard line by his own teammate. Oh, yes. You see, Roy Riegels had picked up that ball and ran 69 yards in the wrong direction. Halftime. Move into the locker room. Roy is devastated. Later on in history, they would call Roy Wrong Way Riegels. Sitting there in the locker room, in the corner, towel over his face, he's crying. Coach gets the team together. He says, guys, we're behind. We can do better than this. And he's kind of telling the pep talk and the cheering them up and all this kind of stuff. And he goes, hey, listen, everybody who started the first half is going to start the second half. Well, Roy was a starter. He was a starting center. And he goes, everybody starts the first half, is going to start the second half. Let's get out there, let's get warmed up, and let's go win this game. Team runs out. Everyone except Roy. Roy continues to sit on the locker room floor, towel over his head. Coach walks over to him and says, Roy, did you not hear me? Did you not hear what I said? I said, everybody starts the first half, is going to start the second half. You're a starter. Come on, buddy. Let's get out there and play. Roy pulls the towel off his head. He looks up at his coach. He goes, Coach, I can't go out there. I've embarrassed myself. I've embarrassed my family. I've embarrassed this university. I've embarrassed this team. 71,000 people watch me run 69 yards in the wrong direction, I ain't going back out there. Coach, they're going to be talking about me in Chicago at Mission Church. I love the coach's response. He looks at Regals and he goes, you know what, Regals? All that may be true. But there's a whole nother half of the game still left to play. So I don't know what your story is. I don't know if you've run 69 yards in the wrong direction. I don't know what your past looks like. I don't know where you are today with Jesus. But the message is to embrace grace. Why? To live with courage. Why? Because there's a whole second half to be played. The world needs you. The world needs your story. The world needs you to reach out a hand of second chance. Let's go. Let's live as people of the second chance. That is our calling. Our life is going to shrink or expand in proportion to one's courage and grace. And Jesus is asking us to live a courageous second chance life. Let's pray. God, we love you. We thank you that you use people just like us. Broken, messy. We've failed. We've disappointed. We've let others down. We've hurt ourselves. We've hurt family members. All these things are so true of each one of us. And yet because of the cross, because of Jesus, you say that you have a hope and a future for us, that you love us. I pray that we will embrace the second half of our story, that our purpose, our pain will have a purpose, that our loss can in some way be used to help others, that we forgive fiercely, we love one another, that we accept ourselves. Let radical grace reign in this church, our lives, in this community, in our homes, our workplaces, in our marriages. Let grace abound. It's in your Son's name we pray. And all of God's people said,